Good morning. I had the opportunity to have a look at a very cool gun. This is an L85A1 and it's not an airsoft one, this is a real one. And I had the opportunity to compare it directly against a WE L85A2. Now obviously the A1 and A2, they do have some differences, and the real L85 that we see here does have some differences from a general A1. The upper receiver, for example, is an A2. There are a couple things here that need to be done on a housekeeping basis. So first up, this was on very short notice. I did not know that this would be here on the day I turned up, and so the footage is going to be very strange, very limited. I didn't have a lot of time, and the audio died for most of the footage. So that is unfortunate, but we do what we can with what we've got. Second up, this is the 100th video on the channel and we're doing really well. We have 28,000 subscribers now, which is really fantastic. So thank you so much everyone, and that's really cool to see. In terms of the next video that's coming out, we actually have a Enfield MP5, so again a real MP5, and I had the opportunity to compare that directly against the VFC MP5. And so that is the next video coming on the channel. If that is something you're interested in and you're not subscribed already, then hey, that's worth a thought. Third and final point, everything here is entirely legal. It is legally bought and owned by a friend of mine. He wouldn't tell me how much it cost, but it was a very large amount and over £5 at least. L85 is very rare to see this in civilian hands, but nonetheless, it is here, it is legal, and it has had the barrel gouged out and filled in, but otherwise I believe everything it's a real L85. The only difference is that the barrel has been chopped up and filled in internally.
The phone camera as well. However, one of these is a little bit different to the other, in that this one is not airsoft, so we can see some differences here. In terms of the steel finish and such, these are both very similar indeed. The SUSAT on that is genuine, the SUSAT on that is from a company called Nuprol. This is apparently a pre-production L85A1, however it has been slightly modernised, as we can see, by the A2 handguard. So things are a bit different here to what we are used to. We have the non-fenced magazine catch there, however it does have a little bit of something there. Whereas on the WE it is an L85A2, god it's much heavier, and a lot more rear heavy than that, which is nice and easy to handle. If we look through the optics of these, let's focus over here and put the phone.
So in terms of externals, I was really impressed with the W plastic furniture compared to the real thing. The cheek pad is a different colour on this one in particular, but this could be due to cam cream, the face paint, whatever you want to call it, repeated rubbing up against that, the oils of that get into it. It might be that's caused the colour change of the real one. I have definitely seen real cheek pads as well that have been the normal green. In terms of the steel of the receiver, we see a difference here between the upper and lower receiver of the real one, and this is again coming back to the upper receiver most likely being a full A2, as we can see from that handguard, but the A1 lower receiver is significantly more worn. Nevertheless, where we do see the steel as it should be for both of those upper and lower receivers, they look very close to the WE. Once again, I'm actually really impressed with how close WE has got to getting that right, so hey, well done there. There are some differences. There are some weld marks on the real ones that are not present on the WE, and of course there are some serial numbers on the lower receiver that are not present on the WE. There was something that I actually didn't think to mention in the main video where the audio broke, but that was receiver wobble. On this one, because there were two different receivers again, A1, A2, there was some receiver wobble. I could grab the pistol grip in one hand, I could grab the handguard in the other, and I could wobble the two and get quite a noticeable amount of movement. Now, this isn't really relevant to accuracy as such, because the sight is attached directly to the upper receiver and the barrel is attached directly to the upper receiver. The fact that the lower receiver is practically blowing in the wind from an accuracy standpoint is neither here nor there. Nonetheless, that was a factor on the real one. Again, A1, A2, there are some differences, but I also have time on full A1s and full A2s, and yes, they do often have that wobble. The WE, however, does not, because there's not the same amount of forces going through them, and so they don't loosen up in the same way over time. It's just not the same thing going on internally, and so they don't wear in the same way, and so we don't have that wobble on the WE. Weight balance difference. I mentioned this in the section of the video that actually had working audio.
Whereas on the WE it is an L85A2. God, it's much heavier. And a lot more rear heavy than that, which is nice and easy to handle.
They are very, very different in handling. I actually mentioned this in the L86 video where we built where I built their WE L86 conversion for the light support weapon. That getting that balance is quite important to me, because the WE L85 really does feel so different to the real one when it comes to balance and weight, and it doesn't come off well, unfortunately. That is a big negative point for the WE. This is most likely, apart from other things, because of the big pot metal trigger box in the WE. For the real one, I took some pictures of the fire control group here. There's a lot less going on in the real one than there is in the WE, and as a result the real one just feels so much more nimble. It's so much lighter. It's just pleasant in comparison. In terms of comparing it to other things, I would say that an M16A1 is a lot more nimble, like a lot more nimble, because those things are very, very light. The reason I'm comparing those, however, is because they have the same barrel length. So very, very nimble. However, the M16A1 with its 20-inch barrel is a lot longer overall because it doesn't have that bullpup action bringing everything in. The L85 in general is a lot shorter. It's a lot more suitable for close quarters combat, and it's genuinely feasible with a real one, whereas with the WE it's not. Again, the weight balance just isn't very good. I would say, however, that the genuine SA80 L85, I would put it above the M16A2 for agility, because of that government profile barrel. The M16A2, the weight of it and the weight out front does push it up a little bit, and therefore it does start to push it over. So that's where I would say the L85 is, if I had to give a comparison. Of course, the WE L85, however, different kettle of fish, different things going on, and it is a lot less nimble than it should be. In terms of travel of the bolt of the real one comes back much, much further than the WE. This is a very common thing in airsoft. This is absolutely this is more often than not the case when it comes to airsoft gas blowback rifles. We can see here, however, hopefully I'm bringing up the correct clip now, of bringing the proper bolt back, that it doesn't come back all the way either. The reason for that is because that extra notch there is for taking the charging handle out in order to disassemble the weapon. So it's not actually supposed to come all the way back unless it is being disassembled. In terms of getting full travel from the WE, there are some heavy spring buffers on the recoil guide rods that can be removed to get extra travel, technically. Quick interjection here, because what I was about to say is that if you remove those spring buffers, then you don't necessarily get full travel, and you have the metal of the bolt slamming on the steel of the receiver. However, I tried that and it's actually not correct. Not only do you not get the full travel, but you don't get the full travel because the bolt hits something in the trigger box. That is the main difference here between the airsoft one and the real one. And because it hits something in the trigger box, it either gets stuck on that and then you have to move it forward, and that's fine, or it can get stuck behind that and then you have to take the gun apart in order to get those unstuck. What I was originally going to say is that it's a silly idea. What I'm now saying is that if you do that and fire with it, you're going to break something. So simply don't do it. Cheers. It definitely wouldn't bring it to full travel in terms of bolt lock, because the bolt lock location would not move even if you change that recoil guide spring length. That's not how that works, because the catch is in a fixed position relative to the trigger box. In terms of bolt hold open as well, the WE L85 cannot manually hold its bolt open to the rear using the right side bolt release. That is a lever that is purely cosmetic on the WE, unless you get the English Kiwi bolt hold open mod. This is something that I did on the L86, and is something I did actually on the recent L86 that I built for the chap who brought these L85s up today. So you can tell that he is very much an SA80 fan. But by standard, the WE cannot hold its bolt back open manually. That being said, of course, if you insert a unloaded magazine that does not have its dry fire switch on and then manually pull the bolt to the rear, then it will lock because it sees it is an empty magazine. Bolt movement. This is where we get into sort of the tactile sensation of these two guns and how they differ. The bolt movement on the real SA80 is entirely smooth. It is frictionless, there's no burring, graining, etc. there. This will have been through tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of rounds, and so everything there has self-polished. Of course, everything there is steel, and so it just feels very nice. The recoil spring strength of moving that bolt backward is stiffer, but with the way that the L85 charges, it is all relying entirely on your left bicep. It is doable. Of course, it is not massively ergonomic. We know this already about the SA80. If you're watching this, you probably know a few things about the SA80 already. You know that it's maybe not an ergonomic masterpiece, but however, it is doable. In comparison to that, the WE bolt is much weaker in the recoil spring, but it has a little bit of grain to it as well that hasn't really self-polished with use. And in terms of strength required to pull it back, yes, it is less. Not a lot less though, surprisingly. Again, because of the L85 not exactly being an ergonomic masterpiece, you don't really notice a whole lot that it is weaker or stronger, because you naturally put in quite a lot of effort to get it moving anyway, just because it is at a little bit of an awkward angle. On the subject of the charging and the charging handle, the charging handle of the WE does always have a little bit of wobble. The real one, however, I didn't notice any wobble there at all. If you want to reduce the wobble on the WE, then you'd have to look at shimming it in some way, but you cannot glue it in because it has to be taken out. That charging handle has to be taken out of the bolt in order to remove the bolt for disassembly. Trigger. The trigger was something that I was really looking forward to giving a go, because I've used the trigger on L85s, but it was so long ago. We used these as kids in school. British, we do that kind of thing. We have cadets and all that kind of thing. It's a good time, but it's a very rose-tinted view of military life. But we do get to shoot. And as a 13, 14-year-old shooting these things, I thought, wow, this trigger's great. I'm getting good accuracy. Life is good. But then, of course, over time of not having shot in a while, you hear people say, oh, bullpup triggers are all terrible. Oh, this is bad. Everything about the SA80 is bad. And I think, I try to remember back to that time. I haven't shot in 5 years, 10 years, whatever. I think, but I thought that trigger was really good, actually. I thought that was fine. And so finding out that there was a real one here today, I was really looking forward to giving it another go. Sure enough, I still really like the trigger of the SA80. It is a two-stage trigger. There is, 2-3 millimeters of travel, and then a very sharp brake that breaks over very easily. So the pressure required is not a lot at all, but it is so sharp and so communicative of when that brake is that there is no ambiguity or anything. In terms of weight of the trigger in total, getting it to and past the brake, it's about the same as an MWS, honestly. It's not strong at all, but it is obviously a much sharper brake than an MWS. It does have a little bit of over travel. If we were to compare it against an airsoft high cap or anything like that, then no, that's not what this is. It's not what it's trying to be. But for a military rifle, it is absolutely fantastic in my opinion, and I am very much a fan. If I compare that to the WE, it doesn't bode well for the WE, unfortunately. It is spongy, and it is vague, and it is mushy and uncommunicative. It is everything that you think a bullpup trigger is from what you've heard from influencers and such. It's consistent enough through its pull that it doesn't really affect accuracy, because it is, it's weak, it's weak, it's not strong, and so it's not affecting accuracy in that way. There's no real grain to the WE trigger, really. It's fine in that regard, but it's mushy, it's uncommunicative, it's not a trigger that is conducive to marksmanship in any way, shape or form. Whereas the real SA80 trigger, it's a really good two-stage. In my opinion, I really like it. The butt plate. So I've said before, the plastic of these really match very well. I'm very impressed with what WE has done there. And the rubber of the butt plate, very similar in colour, very, very similar in colour, very similar in feel as well. However, we can see here down the bottom that butt plate has split on the real one. This is something I mentioned for the WE L86 that I built, not in the main L86 video, because at that point of filming that, everything was hunky-dory. However, later that broke. and it's in the process of doing the same here, unfortunately. It is an unfortunate reality of the SA80 that that butt plate breaks. Finally, the SUSAT. This is a genuine SUSAT on this one. I have some footage with sound, so we'll have a look at that as well.
So looking through the SUSAT of this, we cannot use the scope cam for this because it is absolutely terrible for eye relief. I have tried. However, we can poke through like that and see that we have a picture of sorts. It is okay. If I come into this,
so that's the image. Like I said in the video, I can't use the glasses for that to get a proper eye view perspective of that. It is way too short in eye relief. It's far shorter than an ACOG. You actually have to physically press your brow to the rubber of that eyepiece in order to get a complete view. And my definition of a complete view here is that you see the hard edges of the scope's image. So you will occasionally see people using the SA80 in this way, pressing their eyebrow to the rubber of the eyepiece in order to get that full image for just looking at things in the distance, not intending to shoot, and very much not intending to shoot, because if you do, then that recoil is harsh enough that you'd feel it. So the outer radius of the SUSAT eyepiece is high enough that the outer radius that is pressing into your eyebrow is pressing in above the crown of your eyebrow. So you're not going to get heavy scope eye if you fired it like that, but you are still going to get hurt if you do so. So if you want to look through it in a way that is conducive to shooting, then you will have to stand off from it a little bit. In terms of the distances, perfect eye relief, again, you're pressing right up to it. In terms of distance from your eye to the glass, maybe 2 centimeters, maybe. Distance that you get a half image, again, not very far, maybe 4 or 5 centimeters max, and I'm being kind of generous there, really. It is a very restrictive scope. It's not very good, honestly. It's not very good of a scope. The reticle is clear, but of course it is very chunky in comparison to modern designs. The image is clear, but I noticed a slight yellow tint there, only a very slight yellow tint. I do have a real L85 here, the C79, so that's the first generation of L85. That has a much heavier yellow tint than the SUSAT does. But nevertheless, I noticed a slight yellow tint, and I'm hoping you'll be able to see that in the video as well, because I think it does come through and gives you a representative view of what that looks like through the scope. The field of view, in terms of the image size around your vision and how much of your physical vision it takes up, well, because of the eyepiece, and because of how close you have to push yourself up against it, well, it's 100%. It takes up all of your eye view. You can have your other eye open, of course. That's how I like to shoot myself. It's how I always have. But in terms of how much of your view the scope takes up, it is 100%. And in terms of how much of your view the image takes up, if you're at that perfect eye relief where you can see the edges of the image, it's a big image, I would say. It's quite a good field of view. It's difficult to compare it against the ACOG in terms of general clarity, technological capability, etc. But in raw terms of image size, the SUSAT actually does quite well in that regard. Now, of course, it does quite well in that regard because it has such short eye relief. You have to go so close to the damn thing that you can't help but see a very big image. But nevertheless, for that particular aspect of the SUSAT, I was quite impressed. Hello, Editing Hobbs here, just cutting in real quick with an additional point because I actually forgot to really properly compare the genuine SUSAT here against the reproduction that we have on the WE. I'm aware that we're not talking more about the rifle than the scope here, but I feel like it's still worth a mention. The reproduction SUSAT that we have here on the WE is made, well, it's sold by Nuprol. Nuprol is not really a manufacturer usually, they're just a distributor of other things. The SUSAT here is difficult to describe in a sense. Of course, being a Nuprol scope, it is going to lack in several areas by default. However, it's worth, I guess, keeping in mind that for this particular one, I had to use it in the same way, in the sense that to get the best image I could, I had to press my brow to the rubber eyepiece. If I had to do that without having just used the real SUSAT at the same time, then I probably would have been really annoyed by that. But finding out that that was how they are supposed to be, I guess that's a point in Nuprol's favour. However, when doing that with the Nuprol, even then you do not get a full picture. You always have scope shadow around the image for the Nuprol. You cannot get your eye physically close enough to the glass to see a full image. That's not to mention other issues. There was a visual lacking in clarity. There was a very noticeable lack of light transmission. The genuine SUSAT did quite well for this, of course, being proper glass, but the reproduction did have noticeable suffering when it comes to light transmission. I didn't notice any major chromatic aberration or any kind of major color issues, but like I say, there was some lacking in contrast as well as the general light transmission issue as well. There were a few issues there that held back the Nuprol. Personally, I use a SUSAT. I use a spinner SUSAT on my own L86 build. I've actually spoken about this previously on the L86 video. I'm very much a fan of it, but after using this real SUSAT here, the spinner is a very different beast. It's much longer eye relief and it's a much further picture. It's a smaller picture as well. The genuine SUSAT does have a bigger picture than the spinner does, but the spinner has much longer eye relief, so of course your eye is further back, you get a smaller picture. That's how physics works. When it comes to that kind of thing, I struggle to put one over the other. However, the spinner does have noticeable other issues with edge-to-edge clarity. The clarity of the optic around the outside of the image of the spinner really does suffer. There's a lot of streaking, and it does suffer in that regard. But the genuine SUSAT, of course, does not have that issue, but it does have other issues, which we're currently talking about. So, back to the main audio. In terms of other things, the controls of the real one versus the WE, the airsoft version, were also very similar. I was actually quite impressed with how the tactile sensation of using the controls was very similar. The safety catch, the stiffness and the sharpness between the WE and the real one, very similar indeed. You could hand me either one of those and I wouldn't be able to tell between the two, because there is variance in the WEs that I've used and there's variance in the real ones I've used. So both of those fall within each other's variances. The Venn diagram between those two, indistinguishable. Very good job from WE there. The bolt release, obviously only the left side bolt release works for the WE, by standard of course, but hey, I was fairly impressed. It was the same amount of stiffness required to move the WE as it was for the real one. Of course, with the recoil springs being so much stiffer on the real one, you do get a much more authoritative sound when you drop the bolt on a real SA80. That shouldn't be any surprise to anyone. But in terms of the use of the controls, the wobbling of the controls, any kind of slop or anything like that, general stiffness of the control when using it, the WE was very close indeed, so I was impressed by that. The fire selector, switching from rounds to automatic, or repetition to automatic, some people say. Very similar again. For my personal L86, that selector is very sloppy. And it is so sloppy that if I were to actually, have real recoil through that, you can't convert these airsoft guns to fire real ammunition, but just from a theoretical perspective, if a real SA80 had that level of slop in a selector, it wouldn't be very good. It would probably have issues of switching itself over one or another under recoil, because it's frankly not good enough for that. However, the WE that I have here today, it was actually really good. I was very impressed with it, and it was pretty much the same stiffness once again as the real one. So once again, very impressed with that. There were other differences, of course, very slight between the WE and the real SA80. One of them being that the trigger pins felt different. One of them being, of course, the disassembly is a little bit different. You have to cover the end of the recoil guide rod when disassembling the real one, otherwise it will ping off into the abyss because it is under constant tension, whereas on the WE it's actually not under constant tension. Well, not really. It's under very slight tension. Not so with the real one, sorry. If you knock the recoil guide rod out of position when disassembling that, then it can actually ping across a room, and people don't really like it when you do that. In terms of other differences, I mean, there's the obvious stuff, like the barrel is steel, the bolt is steel, everything is steel, whereas on the WE there are concessions to it being airsoft. We use lower pressure propellants, and so as a result things have to be made differently, and of course they're made at a lower price point as well. And WE has done a job of building the WE L85 at a lower price point with the lower pressures that they have available. This isn't a WE L85 airsoft review for functionality, because frankly I don't think I have enough use of the L85s that I've used to give you an opinion of that. I can say that the one that I have and the ones that I've used have done pretty well, but this isn't a review of that nature, and I am not a reviewer of that nature. I don't have the scientific approach that I would think would be necessary for that kind of review. This is instead a comparison of how close WE has gotten to the real steel and comparing it directly against this real SA80. And I think they've actually done a pretty good job. The weight balance is a huge negative, it really is, but they've done the best they can with what they've got. In terms of increasing realism of the WE SA80, there is of course the bolt hold open, that's an obvious one. There is also the possibility of making or finding a steel barrel. No manufacturer has made a steel barrel for mass production of any kind, but some machine shops have done one-offs. After getting that reminder here of what the real one feels like, I do not think that a steel barrel is the thing that fixes the WE L85's feel or balance. The reason for this, of course, is because the total weight of these is actually very, very similar. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but they're very, very similar. The issue is just that all of that weight is in the rear end of the WE. The rear end of the WE is heavier than the rear end of the real one, and it's so much heavier, and it's such a detractor to the experience. Aside from that though, the WE L85 has actually done a really good job in terms of look, in terms of the feels of the controls, you know, the stiffnesses, the sharpnesses, they've done really well. Of course the trigger as well isn't quite there, but it does the job. And frankly, for what it is, I'm quite impressed with what WE has done there. I think they've done quite a good job. So that wraps us up for our comparison of this very rare find, this real SA80 that has been deactivated, and the WE L85A2 gas blowback rifle. I apologise for how much footage has been chopped up and reused for this. Like I say, I was on very short notice and I didn't have a lot of time here, but I wanted to bring this to you guys and give you guys a feel of what WE has done and what that looks like. So thank you so much for watching. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I also got the opportunity to have a look at an Enfield MP5 that we believe had been in service with UK Special Forces and didn't see modernisation past the 80s, and so then it's ended up being deactivated. And so I will be taking the opportunity to, or rather I already have taken the opportunity to have a look through that and compare that directly against the VFC MP5. So if that's something you're interested in, then stick around and subscribe to the channel, and hopefully that will be up soon. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to everyone who's subscribed. It is absolutely fantastic to be where we are after 100 videos. And yeah, cheers guys, see you around.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Thank you, bucket.
Is that guy red?
Top dog. Oh my god, it's digestive.
Oh my god, it's him!
It's him!
Oh, I love a custard cream.